Yeah, we're live. It is 5:49, so I'm here early. Hopefully everyone's doing well and you're getting ready for Christmas. Got excuse me, just a few more days, less than a week. So go get yourself a Christmas present. Go to richardholderperformance.com and get yourself a cam. I mean, you've been good enough to at least deserve like a boost controller. I mean, that's or even a valve spring tool or something like that. So, I mean, it's next to nothing. So get that, put from a Santa, stick it in your stocking, go, oh, look, how did somebody know that I got this? And if you're really clever, just get a turbo and wrap that up because then nobody will know. Tonight, we want to talk about long runner and short runner intake manifolds. You can see the photo that I have up. That is a short runner. Holly Sniper makes one like this. Lots of different people. This is one that is made basically in China and is very, very popular. Popular primarily because it looks cool. And this sort of thing, this fabricated thing. I would argue that it's this shape more because it's easier to produce because of the way that they have to fold and weld and do all the stuff, that it comes out this way because they can make it this way, not because there was any design element or anything. I mean, it looks good, and once they did it with a little thicker material, the plenum, stopped breathing so much and vibrating and making noise and stuff. It's popular just because it looks so much better than even something like this. This one is that's an LS1 or an LS6. So your typical kind of a long runner thing. And so what I want to talk about for tonight is, we know that if we compare this kind of manifold, particularly if it's an LS6, to this kind of manifold, we get this kind of result. This if we were to run it, like, let's say on an NA motor like this, we were to run that manifold, then compare it to that manifold, we know that we get this kind of thing. So the short runner manifold, and so we're talking a relative thing. Shorter runner manifold, the fabricated manifold, has shorter runners than the long runner LS6 manifold does. I think that this was, yeah. And so we know that it's shorter. But a lot of people, when I have this discussion with them about anything, small block Chevys, big blocks, whatever we're talking about, long runner, short runner, they don't really know how to grasp that. When I tell them, the long runner manifold makes more power down low, they think down low. They think 2,000 RPM downward where their truck motor wants to rev or whatever. And I'm like, no, that's not what happens. So if you look at this, the longer runner manifold does make more power down low. It also makes more power in the middle. It also makes more power kind of at the top, all the way past, in this case, past 6,000 RPM. So up to 6,200 RPM, the long runner LS6 manifold made more power than this short runner kind of fabricated manifold. So if you take a look at that curve, this one made more power up top, past 6,200. This one made more power up to 6,200, and then the peak was, and it's a pretty decent gain. I think it was 15 or 18 horsepower or something at the top, maybe even as much as 20 peak to peak. So there are two ways guys can look at this. Okay, this manifold makes 20 horsepower more than the stock one. Yes, it does technically if you wanted to advertise that. But if you look everywhere else, it makes less. But here, and that's not even really the question. We've talked about that we've beat that dead horse a lot. But what happens when we add boost to this thing? And this is kind of what I want to talk about. We know that the same thing is going to happen. So we ran both of these manifolds NA. We ran both of them with this single turbo. So we ran the short runner one. We ran the long runner one. We tried to match the boost and all that stuff as best we could with a manual boost controller. And the typical kind of thing happened. So we look at the power curve, the same kind of thing happens. The long runner makes more power down low. And when I say down low, up to 6,000 or 6,100 RPM. And then the other one makes more power at the top. Now, I think that the difference on this graph, and I think the difference is going to be greater than it's shown here. Hey, you got to wait. The difference is greater than this. It's greater at the top and greater and maybe not greater in the middle. I think what we're seeing here is a change in boost level because we didn't have a electronic boost control. So it's not going to do exactly that. What's going to happen is it's going to be a lot more like the NA curve, and we'll see a bigger difference on top from the short runner, and then more power, through the middle part, and up to 6,000 from the long run one. But my question is, at least my argument for tonight is going to be that, does this matter? So if we have, when that Richard Holdner guy supplies a graph and we go, hey, look how much more torque it makes. Yeah, it does. It makes 40 more foot-pounds of torque or whatever the number is. The question is, does that matter? So, and the reason I'm asking, does that matter, is if we didn't have the second curve here, if we didn't have the blue curve here, and all we had was the red curve here, we would look at that and go, and this is at, no, you have to wait. This was at a fairly low boost level. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if you look at the power curve of the red power curve of the short runner manifold that's not making as much torque down low, and the whole turn up there down at 3,000, 3,500 RPM, that's just the load-in thing. That's not a real number. But the point is that a lot of guys don't realize is that down at 3,000 RPM, the turbo short runner manifold is making 500 foot-pounds of torque. 300, 350, 400, 450, 500. It's making almost 550 foot-pounds of torque. So the question isn't, a secondary question would be, which one you want more torque? Yeah, we want more torque. We get that. Okay, but that's a pound of boost or whatever. That's not that much of a difference. The question you really need to ask, and this is something that guys can ask that would want more power up top, do I have traction for 550 foot-pounds of torque at 3,000 RPM anyway? So if I don't have the traction to put 550 foot-pounds of torque down, especially in the lower gears at 3,000 RPM, it wouldn't matter that I could have 570 or 580 foot-pounds there, because I can't use that anyway. So if I'm having to dial back on the boost or the timing or the throttle position to adjust that, and I already have too much there, it doesn't matter that one of those makes more than the other. Where it is going to matter is, hey, do I want more response rate? Maybe I have a big turbo, and the long runner intake manifold obviously makes more torque in that range, and so it would help me spool up that turbo. But that would only be a thing. Again, you need to get what you need to get. That would only be a thing if you had insufficient torque production there, or you had insufficient boost response for where you want it. If you can still get that with a short runner manifold, and you have all of the power that you can put down with a short runner manifold, and then you have more power at the top, and you want to RPM this thing out past 7,000 RPM where that manifold's making power, and you want to do that, that's a better choice. If you have to detune it or come back on the throttle because it's already making too much torque for you to put down, you don't need more torque. And oh yeah, by the way, since this short runner combination is a turbo combination and you wanted more power down low, that was like at 7 pounds. So instead of 7 pounds, you run 8 pounds or 10 pounds. And if the turbo is spooling up there and you add 3 more pounds of boost there, you are once again going to be, you're going to be presented with a situation of, do I have too much torque there, even with the short runner manifold? Do I have a traction problem there that I need to address, and I don't need more torque because I'm already taking torque away? So having more from the longer runner that also, by the way, just looks hideous. I mean, if you look at these, there is, that's a lot better looking than that is. So when you open the hood and you see that with a turbo, you're like, oh yeah, that's good looking. And then because Richard has done so many videos on short runner manifolds not working for boosted applications, I would say that, and this is the other thing that I want to talk about tonight, is when I say something, when I do a test and say, hey, look, this thing did this and this thing did that, I'm not telling you to get either one of those. I'm not telling you that you need a long runner manifold. I'm telling you that if you want more torque in that RPM range, that manifold does that. But that's not always the question. The question isn't always which one makes more power, because in this case, the short runner manifold makes more horsepower. It makes more peak horsepower. The other one makes more average power up to 6,000. The other one makes more power beyond 6,000. So you got to get real specific about the question that you're asking. And I'm just providing the information. I'm not telling you get a low buck truck camshaft or get a Trailblazer SS intake manifold. I'm telling you that, hey, look, when we run that, it does this. And if you like that and you think that that will help, like, satisfy your needs or solve your problem for lack of horsepower or lack of torque for a long runner manifold, if you think that that will work and help your combination do better, here's the information to help you make that buying decision. A lot of guys, and this is the fault of me doing this kind of testing, I guess, but also the rest of the industry, because you'll get a lot of people that will try to convince you that their thing is the right thing. Okay, Mike, you can only do well with my camshaft. You can only do well with my cylinder heads. You can only do well with my intake or throttle body or whatever it is. And that's just not the case. There's so many combinations out there, like for turbo LSs, that you can make the kind of power that you want to make. There's hundreds of camshafts. There's 20, 30, 40 different intake manifolds. There's that many cylinder heads at least. And you can get the power that you want with all of those. And I just try to show you that that's the case. So when, like, for instance, when I did the cylinder head test, the big LS cylinder head test, I did Cathedral and Rec Port and then LS7 stuff. When I did those, like especially when we did the Cathedral Port head, people were always looking for, oh, which one did the best? Okay, well, do you mean the best horsepower or the best torque, the best average? What thing do you need? What is your metric for defining the best? I don't know what that is. What I got out of that is there are lots of really good cylinder heads, most of which have the potential to make more power than the test motor that I ran them on, and certainly that 80 or 90% of the people out there, the heads can support way more power than their combination is going to make. So arguing about which one of them made the highest peak number on that particular thing isn't really a valid argument. It showed me that there's a lot of good stuff out there and that you're not probably going to go wrong by picking any of them. Pick an airflow research head, pick a trick flow head, pick a ported 706 head or a ported 799 head. You're not going to go wrong. And by the way, the one that you pick isn't the best one. It's not. It can't be, because there's not a single definition for that word in this context. And so, but the cool thing is, like I said, hey, Richard, what cam will help me make 1,000 horsepower? Well, look, let me just cover my eyes and pick blindly, because I'm going to pick one that can make 1,000 horsepower. The key isn't that. The key is the turbo. As long as you have this G42 turbo or any of a number of other turbos that can support that power level, you're going to get that. Same thing with this intake manifold. Yeah, the long runner manifold, and I've been kind of preaching long runner manifolds for good average power production. And for like a street truck like mine, I would have that kind of manifold on it, because that's the RPM range that I want to drive in and I want to make power in. But for other guys, particularly if you're racing, and like I said, if you want to race, more RPM is going to help you. And if you already have limited traction anyway, the more power, the more torque, the more low speed and mid-range, and even up to 6,000, the more that you have of that, the less traction you have. And that's not going to help you solve a problem. So figure out what the problem is, and then, we can jump in there and talk about all the ways to solve it. We just always have to be asking the right question. And like I said, in this case, yeah, long runners do better average power production, but a lot of guys don't want that. Nor do they need that. So, pick your intake manifold accordingly. There. Live stream. Long runner for the win. Yeah, if that's what you need, as long as you have traction. But as you can see, 550 foot-pounds is a lot of torque, and you're going to have trouble harnessing that. And that, like I said, that's fairly low boost stuff. That might be a little more than 8 pounds. I mean, that might be a little more than 7 pounds. That might be, I don't know, 9 or something like 9 or 10 or something. Can't remember what this was on. Can't remember. It was a 5.3. Oh, so it probably is more like 10 pounds or something. Long runner for the win. Number 2, remember to hit the like button. That's right. Funny Santa drop off 50-pound injectors to go with the cam. Santa knows, man. Well, little Saint Nick, he's got it going on. Sleeper intake. Good evening. Finally heard the notification. Good. Does the sheet metal intake outweigh the loss of performance? Well, it doesn't lose performance. It actually gains performance, but gains performance at the top. So if you're running to 7,500, it looks pretty good. Long runner for the street is more better. Yeah. Which would you recommend for a centrifugal supercharger or procharger? Which what? Which intake manifold? It would do the same thing as we're talking about here. The one thing that would happen is that the centrifugal would be nice with a short runner manifold, because if you're revving it, you're adding more blower speed and you're adding more boost and you're adding more power, but you'd see the same thing. You'd see a big loss through much of the curve. And so what RPM range do you want to run? All depends on what your engine's designed to run. 7,000 plus engines require different intake manifold. I would argue that they don't. You have a trade-off here. So what do you want to do? This thing ran to 7,000, and in a race to 7,000, the long runner manifold would win, if that's what you were doing. If you're running from 6,000 to 7,500, then it would be a different story. Uh, 40 foot-pounds of torque at 3,000 is useless for the most part. I don't ship to 3,000. It's not a diesel. Yeah, but you're running around with the motor from 3,000 to 5,000 or 5,500 way more than you are from 5,500 to 7,000 or 7,500, particularly on the streetcar. Procharger is just a brand of centrifugal supercharger. If you want more traction off the rip, short runner, even with boost, way more usable with length on the runners and matters for your application. Torque Storm centrifugal, that's what I recommend. So long runners for the win, but here's my question. How long a manifold have to be considered a long runner or short runner? If there's any number, it's just put the longest you can find. You won't put on the longest that you can find. All of the factory style intake manifolds, Trailblazer SS, LS1, LS2, LS6 for the cathedral port stuff, all of those are going to be fairly similar in their runner length. And you won't find any that are longer than that, except maybe the cross ram that Holley sells for it. So you don't have a bunch more to choose from. If hood clearance is the best question, and why I went with the short runner. Well, the hood clearance isn't an issue with either one of these manifolds. The hood clearance, that both of these manifolds fit under any of the hoods. If one will fit under the hood, the other one will fit under the hood. So that's not a hood clearance issue. That is a question for a Trailblazer S truck style manifold, but not for these. Not for this manifold, not for an LS6 manifold. That fits under the hood because it came under the hood of a Camaro and a Corvette. Use nitrous. You don't have to worry about power down low or high. It works all the way through. Minimum 8-inch for long runners. I don't have a runner length for that because it depends. I get the question. I have a Vortec TI centrifugal and it does a nice job. 687 on my 6.2 at 10 pounds on E10 94. Okay. Positive displacement supercharger of sorts works on the street. Yep, that works good. This YouTube featured, by the way. What's YouTube featured? Couldn't the same philosophy apply to cathedral port head versus a rec port head? What do you mean? It doesn't. That doesn't affect runner length. I mean, I'd have to look at the heads and measure them, but I don't think that the runner length is much different. Using nitrous down low in the power curve will blow the motor. Yeah, you don't want to hit that at 2,000 RPM, although I've seen people do that. Aren't cathedral ports better than what? For what? It's made up my mind regarding intake manifolds. My C10 doesn't have a drag suspension. Rec ports flow better. On factory heads, a rec port factory head flows more and makes more power than any factory cathedral port head. This changes when you do aftermarket stuff, though. 8-inch minimum, but how long can you go? Yeah, don't spread around the 8-inch thing. That's not a thing. There's no number on that. How big is the difference between long and short runner intakes when they wet the runners and dry runners, or is there one? There's still a big difference. The runner length doesn't change. A wet or dry intake manifold doesn't change. It doesn't affect the length. The length is the distance that the reflected wave has to travel up and back. That takes an amount of time. That means the reflected wave arrives at a specific time relative to piston position and does so at a specific time based on RPM. We'll assume that the cathedral port heads increase the LSR in the port. What do you mean the LSR? Plastic intakes can only hold roughly 40 pounds of boost for all the people that are going more than 40 pounds. Sonic ram intakes on the old big blocks were 30 inches, had mild supercharging effect. They don't have a mild supercharging effect. They just have reflected wave and inertial ram and Helmholtz resonance like every other intake manifold made. The thing about boost is just these pressure waves. It's not really boost. I know stock Godzilla heads are good, but I'm crossing my fingers for Cleveland style heads for it, if not purely for the exhaust port look. Yeah, I don't know that they're going to do that. Only 40 psi. Yeah, that'd be a lot. Don't kill torque, just get more traction. Slicks, traction bars, pedal the old girl as long as you can drive it. Yeah, it is better to have too much power than not enough, because you can come back on the throttle, but once you're at full throttle, you can't go any more than that. Drifting a big wide power band from 3075 is optimal, and centrifugal application would a long runner help bring the low end up. Yeah, a long runner manifold will do exactly this, and it'll do that whether there's a centrifugal blower there or not. PI intake manifold instead of a Victor Jr. Do you have a 462 valve? Because a 462 valve will make a lot more power through most of the curve than a Victor Jr., but it's not going to make the peak power that a Victor Jr. does. Which of your cams would you choose for a 6-liter and PRC heads from Texas Speed? I would need way more information than that. What motor is it? What do you plan to do with it? How high do you want to rev it? What kind of power do you want to make? All of that stuff. What intake manifold are you using? For 454 big block, would you recommend a Gen 6 factory truck intake or a high ram? A factory Gen 6 manifold is going to make a terrible power curve, a terribly different power curve than a high ram. That factory truck intake manifold was designed to make power at, I don't know, 4,800 or something. And with a 236 cam, you're going to want a different intake manifold than that. A dual plane would be good. A single plane would be good. A high ram, I think, would be really good. The intake cam, heads, transmission gears, they all have to complement each other. Total package needs to be carefully thought out. At least that's my approach. Yep. If you have a positive displacement blower, power is dropping off on the top end, would it hold out for longer by instead running an NA cam that shifts the power more into the higher RPM range? Well, oddly enough, a positive displacement blower cam does that already because it has a wide LSA. Typically, they have a fairly big split intake to exhaust, and they tend to favor power at the top. It should already do that. An NA cam typically would have a tighter LSA, and it would usually make more average power than power on the top. Now, you can design a camshaft to do that, but if you have a positive displacement blower cam like from BTR or Cam Motion or Texas Speed or any of these things, if you look at it, they know that a positive displacement blower has really good low and mid-range power because it has immediate boost, but they don't do very well on the top. And so when you put camshaft in them that kind of favors the top, which most PD blower cam designs do, they're already there. Just a note to add, LS1 intakes are very cheap used on eBay, but the Dorman LS2 is still a bit higher than a whole Chinese sheet metal intake with rails. I was looking up the Dorman LS2 stuff, and they're like fast money now. They were within, the ones I was looking at were within $100 of a fast manifold, which is not a choice that I would make. I would definitely pick the fast manifold. I like my old small block Chevy. Yep, that's all good. You can soften the low end hip by using rec port heads versus Cathedral on boost. Yeah, below 4,000, the Cathedral tends to make a little bit more power than the rec port does. Does it make sense to bring a long runner intake for low mid-range than try for additional top end with longer duration on the cam, or do you want intake and cam to reinforce each other? Well, you have to decide that. What RPM range do you want? LSR is the long side radius, okay. 462 valve, 12-to-1, E85, 234 cam. Yeah, you already have the right intake manifold on there. You're not going to want to run a PI with that sort of setup. I'm assuming that it has unported PI heads. You're going to struggle with that. But considering the Victor Jr. custom intake manifold, want to try to keep it low end, but want enough up top. You have way too much camshaft in there, I think. Well, I don't know, the PI stuff is kind of measured differently. So, but yeah, I think for low end, 12-to-1 static is not what I would do. That camshaft's pretty big, and a Victor Jr. None of that's going to be none of that stuff is going to be low end, and you're not going to have low end and also be able to spin it to 8,000, and that's not going to work with an unported PI head, anyways. I like my Ram truck, the IMRC. Does it have a the later Ram stuff has a dual runner intake manifold, a genuine dual runner intake manifold where they change the runner length. And that's pretty cool because we tested that and that works really well. I mean, people have been doing that for a really long time. If you just look at a, when was it? A 90s Integra GSR and into the 2000s, I think. Scrolling back, I'm looking at something. Scrolling. I want to see what the LSR thing was. I can't remember now what the question was about that. Long runners. Scrolling. Keep those doggies scrolling. We've assumed that cathedral ports increase the alongside radius in the port. So you think that that was your question? You think that the runner length did change on the cathedral head? I can't swear to that. Given that the intake manifolds will interchange, I didn't know that there would be a change. I mean, they'll bolt on. I didn't know that there would be a change in the distance in the port. I suppose that's possible. If there is, it would be very, very minor. And the change that they have in low speed power and high speed power are not a function of the runner length, I don't think. What I suspect on that is that the difference between a cathedral and a rec port head has much more to do with the port volume and the valve sizing. And then also chamber volume, if there is a chamber volume difference between the cathedral port, the particular cathedral port, and the rec port heads that you'd be testing on the factory stuff. Like if you compared it a 317 to an 821 head, they would have comparable port volumes. But if you compared a 821 to a 706 or even a 799, you have a fairly sizable change in combustion chamber. And so you would have a change in power just from a change in compression down low. But like I said, port volume, much bigger port volume, and then much bigger valve size also. You have a good change in airflow, but you also have a big change in valve size. So change in coefficient of discharge as well. What's the big nasty cam that will make my Gen 6 454 love 6500? If you pick like the race roller stuff from the Comp Cams catalog, you pick like a 271, 285 at 50 kind of thing, it will definitely rev up there. 6500 on a 454, probably even that BR300 cam, which is a 255, 262 with a single plane intake manifold and decent heads will easily rev that high. Taurus HO had that didn't. Yeah, Taurus had multiple runnership. Since I have the money, I'm going to be throwing an LSA on my 6-liter L77. Would you recommend a cam that makes up power up high since the LSA makes good power down low? Well, again, you have to decide that. What kind of power curve do you want to see? And also, the other things that people consider way more than power, I would argue, is that, and because you can adjust power also with boost on that blower. But what about drivability? Like, you're going to try to use a stock converter. Do you want the thing to not buck around and stuff? You know, all of that's a consideration when you're choosing camshafts. So what is it you want? The one thing that's nice about a typical positive displacement blower cam is with a really wide LSA, typically they can idle fairly well, and you can use them with a stock converter and they drive fairly well. And then the blower kind of makes all of the power. And then a lot of times, the other consideration for the PE blower stuff in terms of camshaft is, are you running pump gas? And if you're running pump gas, and just like this discussion that we had with the runner length, if you've got 30 or 40 more foot-pounds, can you do that on pump gas without having to get into detonation? A lot of times you can't. And so if you can't, then don't worry about that. Then put a camshaft in it that doesn't do that, and then shifts power up higher. But all of those things are considerations. I can make 420 horsepower with a 10-to-1 355 small block Chevy with performer RPM heads and a comp cam 268 750 carb and air gap. I don't know about the RPM heads. I'd have to go back and look and see if I have any flow data. And it seems like there's different versions of the RPM head, that earlier and later ones maybe are different somehow. I don't know what those flow. A 268 cam seems a little on the small side for 400 horsepower, for 420 horsepower. 750 carbs enough, and RPM air gap is the right intake manifold. If those heads flow well, maybe a little bit more camshaft. Been playing with my Power Stroke 6.0, 38 pounds boost. It's a freight train. That's good. Yeah, the boost is just getting the airflow to the fuel that you've added to it. So hopefully you've added a bunch of fuel. My question is whether I can have both low and high end if I pair a long runner intake with a long duration cam. No, you can't, because it doesn't do that. It doesn't do, one doesn't offset the other. It will help if you have a long runner intake manifold and a small cam, and then you put more camshaft in it. It will make more power up top, but it's not going to make the power that a bigger camshaft and a short runner intake manifold make. You just can't. You can't have the best of both by doing that. After all the years of testing, do you think that there is a relationship between valve angle, like 23 degrees versus 15 degrees, and where the power band peaks? I think that's a loaded question, because I don't think that the valve angle itself, I've never seen, nor can I even imagine a situation where the valve angle would be the only thing that you change in a cylinder head for a comparison like you're asking about. So the valve angle itself isn't the change. What else changed with the valve angle? So if you take a set of 23 degree small block Chevy heads or big block Chevy heads, and you have a 15 degree set, you're also going to have bigger valves, a completely different chamber design. You're going to have probably way different ports and flow. And so it's going to be, one of them is going to be a race head. One of them is not going to be that. And so, yeah, the race head is going to make power at a higher engine speed, but that's not just because of the valve angle. Is it worth an upgrade to an LS6 intake manifold on my stock LS1 with long tubes? I wouldn't worry about that. It will be better, but I don't know if it'll be better enough to offset whatever the cost of an LS6 manifold is now. And if yours is, I don't know what year LS1 yours is, but they started putting LS6 intake manifolds from the factory on all the LS1 cars, because it's a better intake manifold. And once they developed the LS6, they're like, yeah, everybody's getting this intake manifold. Does the increase in torque mean extra fuel usage, or is the increased torque making the engine more efficient? That the increased torque has little or nothing to do with cruise fuel economy. Those are different things. The amount of fuel mileage that you would get when you're out wide open throttle, because you're making more power, you would have more fuel usage. It's not going to increase the fuel mileage. It's going to increase the fuel usage, but it may or may not do that under cruise, where you're trying to get good fuel mileage. On the 4.8, we went with the cathedral port heads to increase torque, whatever extra scraps we could find, and use a centrifugal supercharger because it would rev. Worked out well. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, you don't really have an option to do a rec port head on a 4.8 anyways. unless you did some sort of big bore 4.8 and you put a different, like one of the 3-inch strokes in there or something. But otherwise, you can't do that unless somebody makes. There are a couple people that are making small bore rec port heads, but unless you were really revving a 4.8, that wouldn't be a good choice. After 2004, LS1s had L6s. How far after 2004 did they continue to make LS1s? That would be my question. So does that mean that only 2 years of the LS1s got L6 intake manifolds after that? Finally caught one of the live streams recently. Got the Truck Plus cam installed it. Love the chop. Have a 3584 RS sitting on the shelf, just eating a need to get it installed. You'll like that if it's, I mean, I'm assuming that this is a 4.8 or a 5.3. That's what Jimmy's running around with right now in the Tahoe, is the Truck Plus cam and a 3584. He had a problem with the S2000 motor, had a bad spring or lash adjuster or something, but I think he's got that worked out now. And so he's been driving it around on the wastegate at 8 pounds, I think. And then so we hopefully should be on the dyno with that pretty soon. Running 85, I'd also like to do a converter without sacrificing drivability. Maybe 3000. Still deciding what cam to pair with on LSA, not a daily, but like streetability. Yeah, and I think you don't need to have a 3000 RPM stall converter for the combination that you're talking about. It's going to make a lot of torque. You can go with less than that because, like I said, with the roots blower, you put your foot in it, it should make boost immediately. Sure, this has been beaten to death, but can an LS3 head work on a 5.7 LS1? No. And it's not what you would want anyways. 318 notched out for larger heads. Would that also help on the 4.8? I mean, what's a 318? A 317 head? And are you talking about being notched out for larger bore? I hear LS3 heads on a 6-liter. Even if you're correct, the lower compression makes less power everywhere under 5,500. No, that's false. It makes less power than what? What are you comparing it to? So when I've done direct comparisons, direct back-to-back comparisons on a 6-liter with, I've run 706 heads versus LS3 heads, and I've done 799 heads versus LS3 heads, and I've done 317 heads versus LS3 heads. About 4,000 is the crossover point, not 5,500. It's nowhere near 5,500. That's bang for the buck for a cheap blower on a 5.3. I don't know that there is one. There isn't a super cheap option. Maybe a Torque Storm. Vortec might have an inexpensive truck one, like a non-intercooled truck one. They're talking about notching the bore for valve clearance. Notching the bore for what? You can't notch the bore on a 4.8 for rec port heads. That won't work. I know that I tried. You can't notch it enough for the valves for LS3 heads to fit on there. And you know, it was all because I did the video where we cut out a section of the block and cut out a section of the head to show you piston to valve clearance, and then to also show you that we can't notch the bore enough to put the LS3 heads on a 4.8, or a 5.3. Not that you'd want to. That'd be a terrible combination. Is it a big loss at 2,000 to 3,500 for what? Take a look at the video. The dyno results are up there. If you care more about the power in that range, then you should put or cathedral port heads on it. You could put ported cathedral port heads on it and make more power everywhere. Cheapest way to get an RHP GTX 3584 RS and make your exhaust pipe see it. Oh, the cheapest way to make power, yeah. Turbos are really nice that way. Unity Motorsports recently did a video on notching out the bore to accommodate the increased valve size on a Mopar 318. Oh, I thought we were talking about a 4.8 LS. You can notch the valve on some stuff. GM did it from the factory on their 396. They had it notched for their rec port heads, but not on an LS. Caleb, yeah, the LS3 heads will lose power in that range compared to a cathedral port head. Finally starting to tear down on my Gen 453 with 799 heads, putting ring gap, springs, cam, resealing everything. I also got myself a Haltech Rebel LS for Christmas. Very nice. We've used those now, and I like the Rebel. It worked good. Turbo-y goodness. Womp. Turbo-y, for those of you wanting to see the power curve, look at that. Wow. Charging hard on the big end. Unless you get some marketplace deal that doesn't turn out to be a Nigerian print and Jeep turbos and a welder. Yeah, it's hard to beat that. The problem is even with that, like I did a DIY turbo video, and you know, turbos are inexpensive. You can get turbos that make good power really cheap. I mean, our 3584 is, you know, $350 or something like that. But then that's not all that you need. You know, you're going to have to get all the exhaust to the turbo. You're going to have to get a downpipe. You know, you have V-band flanges. You have discharge tube. Even if you don't do an intercooler, you have a discharge tube. You're also going to have bigger injectors, a pump. You're going to have tuning. And then pretty soon, you know, it's a pretty fair amount of money. But the thing is, when you do a turbo, you don't just you don't get 50 or 60 horsepower. You get hundreds. So it's a pretty good deal. What typically gives up first on a 2000 LS1 block, since they're considered as the weaker of the LS series? As I said, I have a Ford's 3.3 and a VS Racing 7875. I don't think you have to worry about the block with a 7875 unless it's a Gen 2 or Gen 2.5 or next gen or later kind of thing. 1,000 horsepower is about as much as we take those blocks. So if you're out running around at 10 or 15 pounds on that thing, should be fine. Want to mimic, if possible, to mimic what they did on a 318 with the LS. That won't work on LS3 heads. It would work on heads that would have maybe a little bit bigger, and the LS3 also has an altered valve position than compared to the cathedral port. Porsche 944 with an LS3, very nice. I like it already. BTR stage 4 LS2 intake. I didn't know enough and very happy with the street manners now. What cam would you choose for this package in a street-friendly setup? No track. If it's just a drive-around thing, I definitely would put something smaller than the Stage 4. Now, I don't know what Stage 4 cam you have, but even a Stage 4 truck cam I wouldn't pick. I would pick our Lowbuck truck cam, or if you want even something smaller than that. I don't know what the drivability is. Is this a manual trans car on the 944 or automatic? What is it? Got myself ITB Cathedral Port intake for Christmas. Nice. Have you ever ran one of these? It depends on which one you're talking about. I've run a few of those. I ran the stuff that Speedmaster has, and it works good. And then we also ran the kind of an ITB setup, because the guys from Performance Design, who have amazing looking manifolds, I ran their carbon fiber one that they have, and then we took the lid off, and then it had adjustable stacks on it. And then we just went to wide open throttle and then took the lid off and run it as a open plenum, essentially an ITB setup, which is kind of cool. And it makes good power like that for those people who are interested. Without testing any of the knockoff cams, I've been seeing them for Windsors and LS. I'm wondering how they perform and hold up. I think the longevity would be problematic. I have spoken with some people that have tested stuff, and the metallurgy can be problematic. And then also just getting the specs that are like, this cam is a sloppy stage 2, and then you cam doctor it and it's not a sloppy stage 2. In fact, it's like in this particular instance, on the guy that had tested this had given me this information, it was a stock cam. So they just knocked off a stock cam. And not only that, there was another one that was, you know, most of the roller cams or billet deals, but this one that he tested that was supposed to be for an LS was a cast cam, which would immediately fail. So there are problems. I mean, I don't know that all of them are like that, but there are problems. Torque-Storm have anything new and improved? I don't know. I've not seen their stuff. Any update on the 4.3 liter Vortec cams? I don't know if I'd have to reach out to Brian and see if the Summit stuff, if they're working on that. What cam specs did you use for your friend's 4.3 boat? I'm thinking that we put a stock cam in that, back in that. But because his is just a, it's a carbureted dual plane MSD distributor, stock heads, stock pistons, all that stuff. And I think it just has a stock cam in it because he doesn't, it's not going to rev very high. We may have, I could go back and look. We may have put the small, like a really small comp cam in there too. I just can't remember. I bought a good TIG welder. I'm yet to practice with it. I'm repairing my exhaust on my Land Cruiser. Let's practice. Yep. Exhausts can be hard to weld unless it's the mild steel stuff. Is there any horsepower level where you wouldn't want to use cast iron log manifolds for turbo setup? Well, a log manifold itself isn't necessarily the problem. I'd have to see exactly which one you're talking about, and then you'd have to compare it to where you know, how does that particular one or ones, how do they flow? And then do they have back pressure? I would have to test it. But as there's no universal thing where log manifolds are bad and then tubular headers are good. 944 is a manual car. For my birthday, I bought myself a 3D printer and a 3D scanner. What did you pay for those, if you don't mind me asking? And like, what kind did you get? Because we were thinking about getting some of those. I don't want to talk too far out of pocket, but a few good streams ago, you mentioned selling merchandise. Have you considered trying to do a motor to give away? I don't know if it's feasible, but it'd be cool. I honestly don't understand how these people are giving away cars and stuff. I talked a little bit to Steve Morris about it, and I don't really understand I don't understand how that's possible. I don't understand how the cost of the car can be offset, or even a motor, how that can be offset with, we have sales that we do, that we're selling stuff at the shop, but we don't have like t-shirts and all that stuff. So I don't know. I don't understand how they get an increase in sales enough to offset whatever these cars cost. I just don't understand the mechanics of that. You guys are cleaning up for Christmas. Yeah, sales are really good in November and December. I bought a sloppy stage 3 knockoff for $50. It was an L7 cam. Yeah, that's not good. That's a big difference between that and a sloppy stage 3. I forgot what the first cam you said was for my Gen 6. Yeah, go get a BR300-14. B as in boy, R as in Richard. Machining was not good. Yeah. Which cam would you recommend for an LS1 383 turbo? I have a sloppy best in it now, but I have a sloppy stage 2 on the shelf. I guess I can just check the specs and figure it out. Well, what kind of power are you trying to make? And if this is the LS1 block thing, the sloppy best you have in it is going to be fine. You're going to be able to make 1,000 horsepower with that cam very, very easily. What's the status on the 4.8 that you were taking a 4-inch bore? It's still sitting at the machine shop. How much horsepower can a stock small block Chevy take before you start looking at forged parts? I don't know what the limit is. I never tried to do a big bang on a stock bottom end small block Chevy. Truck Plus or low buck truck cam for an 07 2500. Occasional car trailer. It's an LY6. I think I would get a Truck Plus for that. Turn on investment on free car from YouTubers is beyond my comprehension. Yeah, I don't understand how they get that to work. My buddy got a 3D printer to make small jigs for our job as an aircraft mechanic, and he spent $200 on it. Get decent ones for $500. I know. We'll go out in just a second. I know. I'm almost done. It's like 48 minutes. It's very close. Talking to Bruno. A 416 LS AFR mongooses that made good power of the factory Escalade intake manifold. Yeah, that's a good intake manifold. I'm considering a carbon R over a high ram. I don't know the difference between those two in power because I don't remember testing that. It's just people buying merchandise for an entry to win. If 10,000 guys buy $50 merchandise, it'll offset the price of a car or motor really fast. At least that's how I've seen it. Yeah, we're not going to have 10,000 people buy something for $50. And the other thing that I would wonder about is, I know, we'll go out in just a second, is if they didn't have that sale, how many people would have bought that merchandise anyway? And so that's the thing I can't wrap my head around. And 10,000 people buying merchandise just seems like an astronomically big number to me. Maybe not for, Garrett, for Cletus, for that kind of stuff, but that just seems like a lot. I'm not in that realm. I'm not in the 10,000 10,000 guys club. 10,000 sales of merch. But just wait till we come out with our new shirts, then everything will change. If you don't mind tinkering, my first 3D printer was $100 off of eBay and had a 300, 200 envelope. My 3D scanner is a Creality Ferret. Works okay for decent scanners. Yeah, I figured for a couple $1,000 we could get something that we could learn with and play with, that kind of deal. I don't know how to do the programming on it anyway to make the drawings and stuff, but I'm sure I can learn. Turbo-y goodness. That one even had the headers on it that I don't like because they're really, really close to the spark plugs. Excuse me, not cool. Not cool. How's the Summit Fab Delta intake? Have you tested? I don't know that I've run theirs. Is it different than this one that I'm showing up there? Did a video on a 480 a while back. You did the centrifugal on that episode, or I'm mistaken. It was a 5.3. What are the final numbers for the stock intake manifold? I don't know which combination you're talking about. I've run 4.8s, 5.3s, and 6.0s with centrifugals and run them a variety of different times with a variety of different configurations. I don't ever remember running a stock 4.8, like a bone stock 4.8 with a centrifugal. We may have done a bone stock 5.3 with a centrifugal before we did the. I don't think we did. I want to say that we didn't. I can look up the Vortex line and see. Dyno results. Cathedral port. Supercharged. We ran an M90 on one. 383. We ran one on the SP, but that was a modified one. 383, strictly performance, M90, 5.3 junkyard Vortex. What is this? Stock base. Okay, that's not it. File, test description. Okay, so we ran a junkyard LM7 with headers, but it had an LS9 cam in it. And then we ran that with a Vortex. Let's see. That made 582 at 6,500. Made 400 NA and then 582. That's probably thinking that that's a fairly low boost level. Because we ended up turning it up, doing cams with it and stuff. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's going to be fairly low. That's 10 pounds. 10 PSI. I can't run a poll. It's curious also compared to an L6 intake manifold for what? Speed freak, what did you want to see? Any plans on testing a Godzilla? I don't have any of those. I don't know why is that being... Oh, apparently I can show the... See, that's all new for me. See, Ethan, you just got lucky. I was showing your thing. I didn't know I could do that. 81 people watching, 45 likes. Step it up. Yeah, I can't do a poll with this setup. It won't allow me to. I mean, I could ask a question as a comment, but I can't do a poll. At least I don't know how to do that. I understand most of what you do are roller lifter engines, but is there a decent company for flat tappet lifters you'd recommend? I'm getting mixed reviews on everything. The only stuff I've used for flat tappet stuff is from Comp, and I don't know who did theirs. I don't know that they did them, and I don't know. It's been a long time since I ran a flat tappet thing, so I don't know how they are anymore. I don't really have an answer for that because I can't tell you, oh yeah, we use these and we don't have any problems with them ever. They work great. Scrolling. I'm not here to argue facts. 46. I don't know what 46 is. Oh, 46 likes. There you go. Okay, I got it. I just had to read up one. Okay, one more minute. Crow or Iski are about the best for flat tappet stuff. I do like the Iski roller stuff. I don't know if I've ever tried their flat tappet stuff, but I like their roller stuff. I got the Einstar one and the Bamboo P1 EMS. Cost me $2,000 all up. The Einstar one, you need a decent computer with a minimum GTX 1060. I don't think that's a problem. And the arms doesn't like when filament runs out. Okay, the EMS doesn't like it. Putting a low RAM on a 5.3. I plan to boost it. How stupid am I? I didn't know that they made a low RAM for the 5.3. I don't know why I immediately went to 5-liter Ford. I'm like, they make a low RAM for a 5-liter Ford? Well, if you have to put a low RAM on because it has to fit under the hood, that's great. Otherwise, that would be one of the last manifolds I would pick for that. I mean, I don't know what the rest of your combination is. Maybe you want to run to 8,000. Can confirm Einstar scanner needs a supercomputer. What about this cam? 236 to 240, 234, 246 at 50. Paul, are you the 454 guy? I got this custom crying cam for $80. Is that a what kind of cam is that? Is it a big block, small block? On the 5th gen, you have to cut the firewall to run the high RAM. I don't want to cut it. Yeah, I wouldn't do that. But what kind of RPM are you wanting to run? Gonna be building my own turbo header for the first time, going in a Honda 2.2 liter. Any tips on designing the header? Well, I would design the header so that it doesn't hit anything, so that it doesn't put heat near anything, and so you have really good access to all the spark plugs. And other than that, just get all the exhaust to the turbo, wherever the turbo is going to. I mean, I don't know how much room you have to really be fancy with the turbo anyways. I wouldn't worry about getting fancy with it. Just get all, like I said, do all those things I said and get all the exhaust to the turbo. You'll be fine. I don't have 454. This is a Cam Motion LS. Okay. Why did you get it for $80? That seems like it was somebody uploading it. At 236 to 234, 246 is fine. All of that seems like it's fine. That seems like a good performance kind of cam. Be more concerned about heat management than flow characteristics. You're not going to go wrong. Flow characteristics aren't going to be a thing. The motor is going to make as much power as whatever turbo you put on it. I wish people would stop buying $100 cams. Richard and Matt both have 200 cams under 200 bucks. Yeah, I know that the cams that I have are good. Otherwise, we wouldn't be selling them. But there are bad cams out there. I don't know which ones, I can't tell you which ones are bad, which ones to avoid or whatever. There are bad cams out there. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about on your what is it, 2.2? Is that you have an H22? Is that what you're putting it on? I would just be more concerned about fitting stuff and not hitting your radiator and all that. I wouldn't worry about equal length or any of that stuff. That's not necessary for what you're doing. F22A, okay. So that's a single cam, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. Single overcam non-VTEC, yep. I think BZ has done a bunch of those. But the good news, that's the good news. The bad news is it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. And I will see you guys all tomorrow. Yes, Bruno, it's time.